It was a bitterly cold night in the small, isolated village of Blackwood, nestled deep in the Scottish Highlands. The village was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the dense woods surrounding it were holding their breath. This was the time of year when the locals locked their doors early, spoke in hushed tones, and prayed that they wouldn't hear the haunting howls that echoed through the mountains. For centuries, Blackwood had been plagued by a curse that turned one of their own into a werewolf during the full moon. The legend had been passed down through generations, but no one knew when it began. Every few decades, the curse would surface, and the village would be thrust into terror as the beast hunted under the moon's silver glow. Lily had grown up hearing the stories. As a child, they frightened her, but as she got older, she dismissed them as nothing more than superstition. After all, she was a rational person, someone who believed in science, not old myths. But that winter, as the full moon approached, something changed in Blackwood, and Lily would soon learn that some legends are rooted in truth. It began with the livestock. Sheep were found slaughtered in their pens, torn apart as if by some wild animal. The villagers, who were used to dealing with wolves in the winter, immediately thought it was a rogue pack, but the tracks left behind were too large, too unusual. The footprints resembled those of a wolf, but they were much bigger, and they seemed to shift between 2 and 4 legs, something no ordinary wolf could do. Lily's father, the village blacksmith, was one of the first to raise the alarm. He was a practical man, not one to believe in the old stories, but even he couldn't explain what he had seen. One evening, as he was closing up his shop, he heard a low growl coming from the edge of the forest. When he looked out, he saw a massive figure, standing on 2 legs, watching him from the shadows. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and for a moment, he swore he saw a flash of white teeth, before the creature disappeared into the woods. That night, Lily's father returned home pale and shaken. He warned Lily and her mother to stay indoors, to lock the doors and windows, and to keep a weapon nearby. But Lily, curious and skeptical, wasn't so easily frightened. She wanted to know what was really out there. The next day, she decided to investigate. Armed with nothing more than a lantern and a hunting knife, she ventured into the woods at dusk, following the tracks that led away from the village. The cold air bit at her skin, and the trees loomed over her like silent sentinels. As she walked deeper into the forest, the sense of unease grew. The quiet was unnatural, no birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of her own footsteps crunching in the snow. Hours passed, and just as Lily was about to turn back, she saw something in the distance, an old, abandoned cabin, one that hadn't been used in years. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Someone, or something, was inside. Heart pounding, she crept closer. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, she could see a dim light flickering from within. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The interior was dark, save for a small fire burning in the hearth. The room smelled of wet fur and something metallic, blood. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, Lily froze. In the center of the room, crouched over a half-eaten carcass, was a figure covered in thick, matted fur. It was hunched, its back arched unnaturally, and its limbs were long and sinewy, tipped with sharp claws. Its face was a grotesque combination of man and beast, with a long snout, sharp fangs, and glowing yellow eyes. It was a werewolf. The creature lifted its head, sniffing the air. It hadn't noticed her yet, but she knew that if she moved, it would. Panic surged through her, but she kept still, barely daring to breathe. Suddenly, the werewolf let out a low growl, its ears twitching as it listened. Then, with a speed that made her heart nearly stop, it turned to face her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, Lily saw something human, in the creature's gaze. It lunged. Lily barely managed to dive out of the way as the werewolf crashed into the door, splintering it. She scrambled to her feet and ran, the sound of the beast's snarls close behind her. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees a blur as she sprinted toward the village, her lungs burning with effort. The werewolf was gaining on her. She could hear its heavy breathing, the snapping of branches as it barreled through the underbrush. Desperation took over, and she veered off the path, heading toward a narrow ravine she knew well. It was dangerous, but it was her only chance. With the beast just feet behind her, she leaped across the ravine, barely making it to the other side. The werewolf skidded to a halt at the edge, snarling and pacing as it searched for a way across. For a moment, Lily thought she was safe. But then, with a terrifying howl, the creature began to climb down the steep bank, using its claws to dig into the earth. Lily ran again, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She could see the lights of the village in the distance, but the werewolf was closing in. Just as she thought it would reach her, a gunshot rang out, echoing through the forest. The beast yelped in pain, stumbling and falling to the ground. Lily turned to see her father standing at the edge of the woods, rifle in hand, his face grim. He fired again, and the werewolf howled, retreating into the darkness. By the time Lily reached her father, she was shaking. They didn't speak as they walked back to the village, but the weight of what had happened hung between them. That night, as Lily sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, her father finally broke the silence. "It's real," he said, his voice low. "The stories, they're all true." Lily nodded, her mind reeling. She had seen it, felt its breath on her skin. The werewolf was real, and it was hunting them. The next day, the villagers gathered to discuss what had happened. Some wanted to flee, to leave Blackwood behind and never return. Others insisted they stay and fight. But one thing was clear, the werewolf would return, and when it did, the village would need to be ready. As the full moon approached again, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when it did, she would be ready.